Checkmate. The shuttle doors opened onto Meridian War College's receiving deck, and 400 cadets from 31 member species turned to look at the newest arrival with the specific, unhurried contempt of beings who had already decided what they were looking at before they had actually looked. Ava Kessler was, by every physical metric the Concord's merit index had ever bothered to formalize, unimpressive. She stood a full head shorter than the smallest Catherine cadet in the crowd, her unaugmented human musculature registering on the receiving deck's overhead scanner display in the bottom 11th percentile for raw strength among the assembled first years. Her skin bruised. Her bones broke under forces that a Catherine hatchling shrugged off without noticing. She could not regenerate a severed limb, could not survive vacuum exposure past 90 seconds, could not, by any reasonable accounting available to the 31 species who had spent the last 11,000 years building an interstellar civilization around exactly these measurements, be called anything except a liability wearing a Concord cadet's uniform. "Terran," said the cadet nearest the ramp, a Catherine male built like a demolition vehicle, his voice carrying the particular flatness of someone stating an obvious and slightly embarrassing fact. "I did not realize the compact's admission quota required an actual body. I assumed it was symbolic." Laughter rippled through the assembled cadets, multi-species and multi-toned, and Ava Kessler, 22 years old and the first human being ever to set foot on Meridian War College's receiving deck, said nothing at all. She simply shouldered her kit bag, walked past the Catherine cadet without breaking stride, and made her way toward the barracks assignment terminal exactly as if she had not heard a word of it. A small, deliberate silence that would, though none of them yet understood it, turn out to be the single most dangerous thing any of them encountered in their entire 4 years at the academy. The first physical assessment, conducted the following morning in the academy's central proving hall before the entire first-year cohort, only confirmed what the receiving deck's laughter had already decided. Ava lifted, pressed, and struck at the very bottom of every measured category, her results projected in stark red against the hall's massive overhead display beside 400 other names, climbing steadily into green and gold. When the hall's automated scoring system finished processing her final result, a grappling bout against a mid-ranked Elixir cadet that lasted 11 seconds before she was pinned, cleanly and without malice, to the deck plating. A ripple of quiet, almost pitying laughter moved through the observing crowd, considerably worse in its way than the open mockery of the day before. "You fought that entirely wrong," the Elixir cadet told her afterward, offering a hand to help her up, not unkindly. "You wasted your first 4 seconds trying to match my grip strength. You do not have the mass to win that exchange. I do not understand why you tried." "I wasn't trying to win the grip exchange," Ava said, taking the offered hand and rising without wincing, though the bruise along her ribs would take the better part of a week to fade. "I was finding out how fast you commit to a hold once you think you've already won. That's useful information. I just paid for it more than I'd have liked." The Elixir cadet studied her for a long moment, clearly unsure whether he had just been complimented or quietly outmaneuvered even in defeat, and said nothing further. Ava filed the exchange away exactly like everything else that first difficult year, not as humiliation, though it cost her plenty of that, but as data, patiently gathered for a war she had not yet been given the chance to actually fight. Earth had joined the Concord 18 months earlier, admitted not through conquest or tribute, but through the narrowest possible reading of an obscure charter clause, a border skirmish between a Concord scouting fleet and an unprepared human orbital defense grid that had, against every prediction the Concord's war planners generated beforehand, ended in a tactical draw rather than the swift correction everyone had expected. The Concord had not been impressed by human strength. Humans possessed none worth measuring. What had unsettled the scouting fleet's surviving commanders, in the after-action reports that eventually reached the Concord Senate, was something considerably harder to quantify. An adversary that had adapted mid-engagement 3 times, faster than any species doctrine accounted for, using tactics no Concord War College had ever formally cataloged because no conquered species had ever needed them. The Senate's decision to admit Earth had been, in the end, less a reward than an experiment. A single cadet slot at Meridian War College, offered with the unspoken expectation that the experiment would fail quietly within a semester and the matter could be closed without further Senate debate. Ava Kessler had been that experiment. She had not been the strongest candidate Earth's own selection boards considered. She had not been the fastest, or the most physically resilient, or the most conventionally decorated. She had been, in the blunt words of the selection committee's final report, the only candidate whose tactical assessments the board could not reliably predict in advance, a quality that had mattered enormously to a handful of Earth's oldest military strategists and meant, as far as the Concord was concerned, nothing at all. The Merit Index ranked every cadet publicly, updated in real time on a board mounted in the central quad that every student passed at least twice daily. Strength, armor integrity, natural sensory range, regenerative capacity, a dozen other categories the Concord's 11,000-year military tradition had refined into the single measurable currency of respect at Meridian War College. Ava's name sat, for the entirety of her first year, in the bottom 3 positions of a 400 cadet class, a fact her instructors noted without particular cruelty and without particular interest either, the way one might note the weather. You will not survive close combat against any cadet in this class. Provost Keith Dorn told her plainly at the end of her first physical assessment, a Vethray instructor whose flat, unblinking evaluation carried no malice because it carried no emotion of any kind that Ava could detect. I would recommend you focus your remaining coursework on logistics or diplomatic tracks, where the compact's admission does not require you to personally survive contact with a superior combatant. I'll take that under advisement, Ava said, and did not take it under advisement at all, spending her first year instead doing something none of her 400 classmates thought to do, quietly reading every war record, every campaign history, every tactical archive the Academy's library made available, not just the Concord's own 11,000 years of doctrine, but the fragmentary records of every species the Concord had ever fought, conquered, or absorbed, cross-referenced against the whole of Earth's own considerably shorter and considerably bloodier military history. Cannae and Austerlitz, the long, slow grind of trench warfare and the sudden shock of blitzkrieg, chess openings and go endgames, and the specific, cold logic of a species that had spent its entire recorded history fighting itself, learning, over and over. That raw strength decided far fewer engagements than the histories of stronger species like to admit. She finished her first year, still ranked near the bottom of the Merit Index. She finished it also having read more military history, human and alien both, than any other cadet in her graduating cohort combined, a fact that showed up on no board anywhere in the quad. Year 2 began with the war simulations, and it was here in the Academy's vast orbital simulation ring. Full sensory immersion pods linked into a massed tactical engine capable of running 1,000-ship engagements at compressed timescales. That Meridian War College's actual selection process truly began, the Merit Index physical rankings giving way to something the Concord considered even more fundamental: command aptitude, tested in team-based war games, scored, ranked, and broadcast across the entire cadet body. No one wanted Ava Kessler on their team. Team selection ran by mutual cadet choice, squad leaders picking their rosters from the assembled pool in descending order of reputation, and Ava sat, round after round, watching every other name called before hers, until she was assigned, by simple process of elimination, to a scrap team of the class's other undesirables, a Catherine cadet named Draith Voss, disgraced for a training ground brawl that had put a squad mate in the medical bay, a Vithray washout named Ojan, who processed too slowly for his hive-linked cohort's taste, an Elixir flight cadet, Rin Sayel, fast enough to outrun anyone in the class and reckless enough that no serious team wanted the liability. "We are the Scraps," Dreth told her flatly in their first team briefing, his massive arms crossed, clearly unhappy to be commanded by a human a third his mass. "I do not expect this to go well, Terran." "Then let's make it interesting," Ava said, and pulled up the simulation's parameters. A standard first-round scenario, defending a fixed asset against a numerically superior assault force. A scenario every other team in the bracket would approach exactly the way Concord doctrine had taught them to for 11,000 years. Concentrate strength, hold the line, meet force with force. Ava did not hold the line. She abandoned the fixed asset within the first 4 minutes of the simulation, split her badly outmatched team into 3 widely dispersed elements, and spent the following 20 minutes doing something none of the assembled instructors' tactical archives had a clean name for: feigned retreats that drew the assault force's armored spearhead into terrain. Her dispersed elements had already seeded with disabled sensor decoys, false unit signatures that made her 4-person scrap team read on the enemy's tactical display as 3 times its actual size, and a final coordinated strike on the assault force's rear logistics train that collapsed its entire offensive timeline before the enemy commander fully understood he was no longer fighting the engagement he had planned for. The scrap team won. The simulation's post-action analysis flagged it in the instructor's private assessment as a statistical anomaly, a lucky exploitation of an inexperienced opposing commander's mistakes, not a repeatable result. Ava read that assessment on the public board the following morning, said nothing about it to anyone, and began preparing for the next engagement exactly as if the word luck had never been used at all. It was not luck. Round after round, bracket after bracket, Ava Kessler's scrap team kept winning against opponents who adjusted, who studied the previous engagement's recordings, who came prepared for feigned retreats and sensor decoys, only to find that Ava had already discarded whatever tactic had worked the previous round in favor of something new, something the opposing commander's careful preparation had never accounted for because it did not yet exist the last time anyone had looked. She fought a heavily armored Catherine assault formation by refusing, for the entire engagement, to engage its main strength at all, instead executing a slow, patient siege of its supply lines that took 40 minutes longer than any Concord doctrine recommended, and won without her team ever taking a single direct hit. She fought a Vethray hive-linked command team, whose networked coordination made their tactical response nearly instantaneous, by deliberately feeding them false information through a captured comm relay, exploiting the very speed of their collective response against them. By the time the hive mind processed that the data was corrupted, the engagement was already lost. "It cannot continue to be luck," War Master Alien Dresk told Provost Dorn 6 weeks into the term, the two of them reviewing Ava's engagement record in the instructor's private observation deck overlooking the simulation ring. "I have run this cadet's win rate against statistical models for pure chance 40 separate times. The probability of these results occurring without genuine tactical superiority is less than 1 in several million." "Then explain the mechanism," Dorn said, entirely without inflection, the way Vethray always spoke of things that troubled them. Her physical metrics remain in the bottom percentile of this class. Her species has no history of Concord military doctrine to draw from. I would like to understand what, precisely, we are measuring in her before this academy is asked to explain it to the Senate. Dresk did not have a clean answer, not yet, though he suspected, watching the recorded footage of Ava recalculating an entire battle plan in the 11 seconds between one enemy maneuver and her own counterorder, that he was looking at something considerably more dangerous than luck and considerably harder to teach. By midterm, the scrap team was a scrap team no longer. Cadets who had refused to serve under a human 6 months earlier began requesting transfers onto Ava's roster, quietly at first, embarrassed by the reversal, then openly, as her win record climbed past every other team in the cohort. Ojin, the Vethray washout whose hive cohort had discarded him for processing too slowly, became, under Ava's command, something his own species had never once thought to make him: a translator rather than a liability, the one member of her team capable of predicting exactly how a networked Vethray opponent's collective mind would respond to a given deception, precisely because he had spent his whole life learning to think just slightly outside its rhythm. "They called it a defect," he told Ava once, late in the term, reviewing engagement footage in the dim light of the simulation ring's debrief room. "The half-second lag between the hive's decision and my own. I spent my whole life being told it made me less than what I was born to be. You are the first commander who has ever asked me what it made me capable of instead. It made you the only person in this academy who can tell me what a hive mind is about to do before it fully agrees with itself," Ava said. "That's not a defect, Ojin. That's a weapon nobody bothered to point in the right direction yet." Draith Voss, who had told her flatly in their first briefing that he did not expect this to go well, became her de facto second-in-command. His physical dominance in close engagements now deployed exactly where and when Ava's plans called for it, rather than thrown blindly at whatever stood in front of him. "I did not expect to respect a Terran," he told her, after a particularly brutal engagement against the class's top-ranked Kothran team, one Droth had personally trained alongside for 2 years before his transfer. "I do not think I fully respect you even now, Kessler. I think I respect what you have made possible. I do not know that there is a meaningful difference between the two in the end." "There isn't," Ava said. "Not to me, anyway. I'll take it." Rin Sael, flying reconnaissance and rapid strike runs at the ragged edge of every tactical plan Ava built, put it more simply, grinning through the aftermath of an engagement that had left her flight suit scorched and her hands still shaking with adrenaline. "You don't fight like anyone else in this entire academy, Kessler. Half the time, I don't understand the order until 3 minutes after I've already executed it and it's already worked. I don't know if that's terrifying or the best thing that's ever happened to my flight record. I've decided it's both." By the season's end, Ava's team, 5 cadets drawn from 4 different species, unified by nothing the Merit Index had a category for, stood undefeated, and Meridian War College's instructors, watching a human cadet with bottom-percentile physical metrics dismantle the Concord's 11,000-year military tradition one engagement at a time, made a decision that would define the whole of her 3rd year. "We cannot allow this to continue unexamined," Provost Dorn told the assembled instructor council, in a session Ava and her team would not learn about until considerably later. "I propose we test the actual limits of whatever this cadet is doing, rather than continuing to allow her an uncontested run of favorable engagement parameters." What the council quietly implemented, beginning in Ava's team's 3rd-year rotation, was a simple and deliberately unacknowledged manipulation of the simulation engine's difficulty settings. Ava's team assigned scenario after scenario rated at the simulation ring's maximum difficulty tier, level 10 engagements designed, on paper, to be functionally unwinnable, while every other team in the cohort continued receiving standard level 2 rotations calibrated for ordinary cadet development. It was not announced. It was not recorded on any public assessment. It existed only in a private instructor log that War Master Dresk, alone among the council, argued against maintaining. "If we are testing her limits," he said, "I would ask that we at least be honest with ourselves about what we are actually doing. We are not testing whether she can win. We are testing whether we can finally manufacture a scenario in which she cannot." His objection was noted and overruled. Ava's team began facing engagements built around forces outnumbering them 10 and 12 to 1, enemy commanders given perfect intelligence on Ava's prior tactics, environmental conditions engineered specifically to neutralize every advantage her unconventional doctrine had previously exploited. She kept winning. Not every engagement. Level 10 scenarios cost her team real, painful losses across that 3rd year, simulated deaths that felt Inside the immersion pod's full sensory feedback, indistinguishable from the real thing, and Ava carried each one of them with a grief her instructors did not expect from a species they had assumed, incorrectly, felt combat losses less acutely for feeling everything less acutely in general. The engagement that came closest to breaking her was the 9th level 10 scenario of the term, a defensive stand against a simulated Catherine heavy fleet outnumbering her force 14-1, run across 4 grueling hours with no scripted victory condition the instructor's own engine had ever actually validated as winnable. Rin Sayel's simulated death came in the engagement's 3rd hour, a reckless intercept run that bought Drath's wing the 6 seconds it needed and cost Rin everything the pod's feedback systems could simulate short of the real thing. Ava felt it happen through the shared tactical link, a sudden, absolute silence where Rin's telemetry had been, and kept issuing orders anyway, her voice steady in a way that cost her considerably more than anyone watching the engagement's outside feed could see, because the alternative, stopping, grieving, losing the thread of a battle plan with 11 more cadets still depending on her, was not an option any commander, human or otherwise, was ever actually given. She won that engagement 40 minutes later and found Rin in the debrief room afterward, alive and shaken and furious at her own mistake rather than at the simulation that had punished it, and said nothing for a long moment before simply sitting down beside her. "I felt you die," Ava said quietly. "I want you to know that landed exactly as hard as you'd think it would. I also want you to know I'm not going to stop asking you to take risks like that one, because it worked and because I trust you to make that call better than almost anyone else on this team. I don't know how to hold both of those things at once. I'm still learning." "Neither do I," Rin admitted. "I think that might just be the job, Kessler." But she kept winning considerably more often than any statistical model of a level 10 engagement predicted a team should, adapting, engagement after engagement, to constraints that should have made adaptation itself impossible. It was Rin Sayel who finally discovered the manipulation. 3/4 of the way through the term, cross-referencing the simulation engine's public difficulty logs against a technician friend's private access and finding, buried in 6 months of quietly falsified rotation data, exactly what the instructor council had been doing to them. "They've been feeding us level 10s the entire time," Rin told Ava, in a fury Ava had never seen from her before, slamming the data onto the table between them. "Everyone else in this cohort has been running level 2s, Kessler." "Level 2s. We've been fighting an entire extra war nobody bothered to tell us we were fighting." Ava read the data in silence for a long moment, and then, to Rin's visible surprise, began to smile. "Good," she said. "I'd rather know exactly how hard the real thing is going to be before I have to find out for the first time when it actually counts." She confronted Provost Dorn directly, alone, in the Vethray instructor's private office, and found, to her mild surprise, that Dorn did not deny it. "You have known for 4 months and said nothing," Dorn observed, with the flat, unreadable calm that made Vethray so difficult to read across a negotiating table. "I confess I did not expect that particular response from a Terran." "You wanted to know what I actually was," Ava said. "Not what the merit index says I am. I understand that. I'd have done the same thing in your position, honestly, if I thought I could get away with it. I'm not here to complain about the rigging, Provost. I'm here to tell you I know about it, and to ask you a straight question. Was this really about testing my limits, or were you hoping I'd finally lose enough to prove the index right?" Dorn was quiet for a long moment, the specific, deliberate quiet of a species that did not waste words on answers it had not fully considered. "I do not know any longer," the Provost admitted finally. "I believed, when this began, that I was conducting an honest experiment. I have watched you win 11 consecutive level 10 engagements since. I am no longer certain what I am hoping for, Cadet Kessler. I believe I have simply become curious, in a way this Academy's traditions did not prepare me to expect from anything wearing your species' body. Then let's find out together, Ava said. Give me the last stretch of the term at level 10, straight, no more hiding it. If my team can't hold that pace honestly, you'll have your answer. And if we can, I'd like this Academy to actually write down what it's watching, instead of burying it in a private log no one but Dresk had the spine to argue against. Her team held the pace. By the term's end, Ava Kessler's squad, the scraps no one had wanted 18 months earlier, held the highest verified engagement record in Meridian War College's recorded history. Level 10 scenarios included, a fact the Instructor Council could no longer keep contained to a private log, once Dresk, with Dorn's reluctant blessing, brought the full record before the Academy's Grandmaster for review. The selection for the Golden Star Tournament followed within the month. Meridian War College's single representative battle group, chosen to compete against 20 other Concord War Colleges in the Concord's oldest and most brutal proving ground, a 30-cycle campaign fought not in sealed simulation pods, but in real ships, real void, hits and misses rendered through a semi-simulated targeting protocol that reduced a direct strike to a disabling, non-lethal charge, rather than an actual kill shot. But that could not, and did not, across 30 grinding cycles of inter-school war, prevent every cost a real war produced when a ship's containment failed, when a hull breach happened faster than an evacuation pod could launch, when the margin between simulated and real collapsed entirely in the chaos of an actual engagement. Ava Kessler was given command. 23 years old, bottom percentile on every physical metric the Concord had ever bothered to formalize, she stood before her assembled battle group. Dreth Voss as her tactical second, Rin Sael leading strike reconnaissance, Ocean finally vindicated at the head of a full Vithray coordination cell, and 11 additional cadets drawn from 6 different species who had spent the last year fighting to earn a place under her command, and delivered the shortest address any of them would remember from the whole campaign. They are going to keep underestimating us, she told them. Every single school we face is going to look at this roster, see a human commanding it, and assume they already know how this ends. Let them keep believing that for as long as it's useful to us. I don't need them to respect us going in. I need them to still be trying to figure out what happened after we've already won. The Golden Star campaign that followed was, by any honest accounting, brutal in ways no cadet aboard Meridian's battle group had been fully prepared for. However many Level 10 simulations Ava's rigged third year had cost her team in advance. 20 schools entered the 30-cycle war. 6 were eliminated in the campaign's opening week alone. Entire battle groups reduced to scattered, disabled hulks by opponents who had trained their whole careers for exactly this proving ground. Meridian's group survived that first brutal culling, not through strength. Every remaining school outmassed them in raw tonnage, in armor, in the sheer physical dominance the Merit Index had spent 11,000 years teaching the Concord to respect, but through the same unconventional, real-time adaptability that had carried Ava's scrap team through its very first simulation 18 months earlier, now scaled across a genuine fleet. She fought the Catherine War College's battle group, the campaign's clear favorite and the tournament's largest single force, not by meeting its overwhelming firepower directly, but by luring its main formation into a debris field left over from an earlier eliminated school's final battle, using the wreckage's own scattered signal interference to blind the Catherine fleet's coordination exactly long enough for Dreth Voss, commanding Meridian's own heavy assault wing with a precision his year under Ava's doctrine had taught him that raw aggression never could, to disable the Catherine flagship's command deck in a single coordinated strike. She fought the Vethrai Synthesis Institute's hive-networked fleet, whose instantaneous collective coordination made conventional tactics functionally suicidal, by fracturing their communications relay early and forcing 12 separate hive-linked commanders to fight, for the first time in their lives, as isolated individuals rather than a single collective mind. an experience so disorienting to a species that had never needed independent tactical judgment that Meridian's considerably smaller force routed them within the hour. By the campaign's 20th cycle, only 4 battle groups remained. Meridian, the Elixir Skyforge Academy's blisteringly fast strike fleet, the Thessaran Consortium's heavily fortified defensive formation, and a coalition of 2 smaller schools who had merged their remaining assets rather than face elimination separately. The losses, by then, were no longer abstract. Meridian's group had lost 3 cadets outright, a hull breach on the 12th cycle that the semi-simulated safety protocols had not caught in time, a reactor cascade on the 17th that took 2 more before the evacuation pods could launch, and Ava carried each name with her into every subsequent briefing, a weight her instructors had once assumed her species would somehow feel less acutely, and that she felt, if anything, considerably more acutely for understanding, in a way few conquered species instinctively did, exactly how permanent that particular cost actually was. She held a memorial for them on the 22nd cycle, in the brief lull before Meridian's group faced the Thessaran Consortium's defensive line, a small, quiet gathering in the flagship's cargo bay that no conquered military tradition required, and no conquered officer had ever thought to hold before a battle group's survival remained so genuinely uncertain. She read their names aloud. Joran Kess, dead in the hull breach. Amara Voss, no relation to Drath despite the shared clan name, dead in the reactor cascade alongside a young Elixir cadet named Peth, who had transferred onto Ava's roster only 2 cycles before the campaign began. "I am not going to tell you their deaths meant something grand," she told the assembled survivors, her voice steady only through considerable effort. "I don't think that's true, and I'm not going to insult them by pretending otherwise. I'm going to tell you they mattered to me, individually, by name, and that I intend to fight the rest of this campaign like that's still true, because it is. That's the only kind of meaning I know how to honestly offer anyone." Drath Voss, who had lost a cousin twice removed in Amara, said nothing for a long moment afterward, and then placed one massive hand briefly on Ava's shoulder, a gesture so far outside Catherine custom that 2 of his own squad mates stared openly. "My people do not grieve like this," he said, "openly. By name. I did not expect to find it useful. I find standing here that I did." The final battle came on the 30th cycle, Meridian's battered 11-ship group against the Elixir Skyforge fleet's 16 remaining vessels, faster and more maneuverable than anything Meridian could field, in the debris-strewn dead space at the edge of the tournament's designated engagement zone. "Their entire doctrine is built on speed and first strike advantage," Ava told her assembled command staff, 20 minutes before the engagement began. Exhaustion and grief, and something harder, colder, and more determined all fighting for space in her voice. "They are going to try to close the engagement in the first 6 minutes, before our coordination can adapt to their speed. We are not going to let them fight the war they trained for." What followed would be studied, in the years afterward, by every Concord War College that had once dismissed the Compact's admission as symbolic. Ava's group deliberately allowing the Elixir fleet's opening strike to succeed exactly as planned, sacrificing 2 already damaged vessels to a first strike pattern that looked, from the Elixir flagship's tactical display, like total victory within reach, before Meridian's remaining 9 ships executed a maneuver that had no precedent in 11,000 years of conquered military doctrine, because it had been born, instead, from a chess opening Ava had studied as a child on a world the conquered had never bothered to properly measure. A deliberate sacrifice, offered specifically to draw an overextended opponent 2 moves past the point of safe recovery. The Elixir fleet's overextended strike wing found itself 6 minutes into what its own commanders had believed was already a 1 engagement, isolated from its main formation and encircled by a Meridian force that should not, by every tonnage calculation available, have been capable of the maneuver at all. Drath Voss closed the trap from the encirclement's northern arc, his heavy assault wing absorbing a punishing volley meant to break the ring open before it could fully form, his own hull integrity dropping past 40% and holding anyway. exactly as long as Ava's plan required, and not 1 second longer. Ocean, coordinating 3 separate strike elements through a jury-rigged relay that mimicked, as best a lone Vethray mind could manage, the instantaneous cohesion his old hive cohort had once told him he was too slow to ever provide, closed the ring's final gap with a timing so precise that the Elixir flagship's own tactical officer would later describe it in the post-campaign inquiry as indistinguishable from a networked hive response, executed by a single unaided mind. Rin Sayel, flying the single most reckless intercept run of her entire career, held the encirclement's last open seam shut long enough for it to matter, her fighter absorbing damage no sane pilot would have flown directly into if she had stopped, even for a second, to run the odds Ava's doctrine had spent 2 years teaching her not to trust blindly. And Ava Kessler, watching from the flagship's command deck as her own hastily improvised battle plan unfolded exactly as she had gambled it would, felt the specific, terrible, exhilarating weight of an entire 11,000-year military tradition quietly, permanently rewriting its own assumptions in real time. The Elixir Skyforge fleet surrendered its remaining formation 40 minutes later, its command structure shattered beyond any hope of reorganizing, before the semi-simulated engagement's kill count threshold closed the match entirely. Meridian War College's battle group, the scraps, the token admission, the human commander no one had wanted on their team 18 months earlier, stood as the last force standing in a 30-cycle war fought by 20 of the Concord's finest institutions. The Golden Star ceremony took place aboard the Concord Senate's flagship, in an assembly hall built to seat representatives of all 31 member species, and Ava Kessler stood at its center in a dress uniform that fit her considerably worse than the pressure suit she had spent the last 30 cycles living in, accepting a decoration whose weight, physical and otherwise, she suspected she would spend the rest of her life still learning to carry. The Merit Index has measured strength for 11,000 years, the Senate's presiding officer told the assembled hall, a Kothrun elder whose voice carried the specific gravity of someone revising a belief he had held for the whole of his considerable life. We built our understanding of readiness for command around every quality this index could quantify: armor, reach, regeneration, the raw physical dominance that has decided the outcome of every war this Concord has fought since its founding. I confess this Senate did not anticipate that the quality which would eventually humble that entire tradition would be one none of our instruments had ever thought to measure at all. Ava Kessler was named Fleet Admiral of the newly commissioned Concord Vanguard Fleet that same evening, the youngest officer in Concord history to hold the rank, commanding a force built, for the first time in 11,000 years, around adaptability rather than mass. The Vanguard Fleet's founding charter, drafted jointly by Provost Dorn and War Master Dresk in the weeks following the campaign, made no reference to the Merit Index at all. The first Concord military document in 11,000 years to omit it entirely, a fact the Senate's more traditional members noted with visible unease and did not, in the end, have the votes to overturn. Standing at the assembly hall's edge afterward, Dreth Voss beside her, Rin Sayel grinning through exhaustion, neither of them had fully shaken. Ozan quiet and steady at her other side, in a place his own people had never once thought to offer him. Ava found herself thinking not of the Merit Index, or the Golden Star, or the rank now attached to her name, but of a receiving deck 18 months earlier, and a Kothrun cadet's flat, dismissive certainty that she was not, by any measure that mattered, an actual body wearing a uniform at all. I did not realize the compact's admission required an actual body, she said quietly, to no one in particular, watching the star-strewn dark beyond the assembly hall's viewport. Turns out it required a mind the Concord had never bothered to learn how to measure. I'd say that's on them. It generally is, Dreth said, something that might, in a Kothrun, have been the beginning of a smile. Fleet Admiral. She let the title sit for a moment, unfamiliar and already, somehow, entirely hers, and turned back toward the dark beyond the glass. A whole galaxy of species who had spent 11,000 years agreeing on what strength looked like, about to learn, one engagement at a time, that they had never actually finished the argument at all. Somewhere behind her, the Senate's presiding officer was already fielding the first of what would become, within the decade, a formal proposal to rebuild the merit index from its foundations, to measure, alongside armor and reach and regeneration, the quieter, harder to quantify thing a bottom-percentile human cadet had spent 4 years proving belonged on the scale all along. Ava did not stay to hear the debate. She had a fleet to build, a doctrine to write from nothing, for a Concord that had never needed one like it before, and for the first time since a shuttle door had opened onto a receiving deck full of quiet contempt, absolutely no interest in waiting for anyone else's permission to begin. The end. If you enjoyed this video, press the like button, subscribe to the channel to help it grow, and leave a comment.